Hi, everyone. I'm Gold Derby News and Features Editor Ray Richmond, and I'm here with Rocco Matteo, the production designer on the new Paramount Plus spy thriller Rabbit Hole, starring Kiefer Sutherland. Rocco, let's jump right in because I just got through watching several episodes of the series and was struck by how arrestingly dark and shadowy the world of Rabbit Hole is. Talk about that.
Well, I think it was planned as a kind of central motif for the mood of the world and the mental state of our heroes. And so it is, a show where our protagonist is particularly, um, you know, dealing with a reality that is troubling, and I think the lighting language reflects that.
I don't think I've ever seen a look that's quite like what you create on this show. It feels so kind of unsettling and like the whole thing is a maze that the lead character needs to solve. Was that done on purpose?
Yeah, absolutely. As much as this show was imagined as an action thriller, a lot of the real action is mental. It's very much about the mental state of our hero and everyone he meets. It's a kind of a cerebral exploration of what it means to be actively engaged in a world, a mediated world where truth is kind of the object. And, it's been said that we live in a post-truth world, and, our protagonist is really struggling with what that means. And so on a kind of social level of society, but also from a personal point of view, he's dealing with, the after effects of some significant trauma.
And those were the marching orders that you were given for the show. Was this was the protagonist and try to put together a design that matches this mindset and this guy's troubled worldview.
It's a real balancing act because, in many respects, the writers and the directors wanted me to create a world that was straightforwardly realistic. And so the places and the materials are real and true. And the subtlety is in what things we could introduce physically and then with lighting to suggest or allude to a kind of state of disquiet, of a bit of turmoil under the surface. So that was the balancing act we were really operating under.
It's really kind of mind blowing because it's like your designs are almost characters in the story themselves. Your work seemed almost to sort of blur reality in the context of the storyline.
Well, thank you for saying is it was very much really the intention of this is that, when you're designing a project like this and you read the characters on the page, I'd like to take a holistic view and see who the players are and what are their worlds, basically. What are they? And so you're just looking at what is the character situation, where do they work, what does it look like where they live, and then you start to think about the intuitive or subliminal things that suggest or speak to their actual mental state. And that was really, the design direction.
It almost looks like what you have behind you right now, your background, looks like something that would have been on Rabbit Hole. And
Mhm.
for all I know, it is.
Yeah.
Um, Talk about the sets that you built for the show.
Well, we were introduced with this notion of our hero, having grown up in a normal suburban home, but having experienced a sort of trauma. So the homestead was a principal environment that we built. and it was something that spanned decades. And so in order to control its eventual, degradation, we had to build that and then figure out an order of doing things. And there's also, the story talks about after he loses his father, his relationship with his best friend. And this is an arc that goes through the whole story. And so, as it would happen, the friends grow up and go into business together, and then each go in their own direction. And so the environments where each person works were principal sets. John Weir being very traditional and grounded, we created this warehouse environment for him and his small company. And his best friend, Valence, who starts with him, eventually goes his own way into a grand corporate space. And that was a combination of location work, and his office primarily was a build on stage. So those three were very central environments that we built. And then there were a number of other smaller things that came up for each character as they were introduced.
Given the tenor of the show, did some of your designs end up getting blown up and destroyed in service to the story?
Yes. Well, in fact, it's funny you should say that. The DBA, which is the warehouse set, that was actually designed and created with the intention of blowing it to smithereens, both on the exterior and on the interior. Ultimately, the show didn't have the resources and the time to fully do the interior explosion. So we primarily concentrated on the exterior. But even the house that Weir grew up in, his family home, we did a fair bit of work on location. We found a location that was, in fact, a suburban home that was slated for demolition, and rebuilt the exterior and basically showed the evolution from, a normal family suburban home in the 80s to something that was fairly run down in the present day.
That's got to be difficult, though, to watch these meticulously produced things that you put together, be blown up. Is it like losing your children?
I've done this long enough where I can come to terms with it. And it can sometimes, it's a little sad, but you do whatever you need to do in service of the story. And so, I've learned not to get too emotionally attached to these things.
You don't seem terribly depressed, so it seems like it didn't traumatize you too
No,
badly.
not too much.
How closely, Rocco, did you collaborate with the stunt coordinators to ensure that the sets were safe for the performers?
Very much. So whether it was on location or on the stage, everything that our stunt coordinator, John Stead, and his team would do is work with the actors to create a kind of ideal choreography of a stunt. And then we would rehearse them, at various stages of the construction of the set to figure out what the ideal actual choreography should be. So there's a scene where, our Weir's best friend does something shocking, which is, I guess I can say it, he jumps off the balcony of his corporate building. And so we wanted something that would allow for a very particular dramatic moment where Weir looks up and realizes what his friend is doing, and they have a moment before it actually happens. So it meant that I had to design the handrail exactly so that he could actually stand on it. and find an elegant way for him to step up without immediately falling off. And so, those were things that ultimately the solutions were simple, but the stunt coordinator would act them out and say, okay, what if we did this? What if you had a planter? What if you did this? And how can we make this feel natural and safe? So all of those things were done on a specifically built stage, so that if he did in fact fall off before he should have, he would land somewhere safely.
Fortunately, you were working with a guy who's with a lead actor who's so accustomed to working in these kinds of shows, in Kiefer Sutherland, who seemed to do stuff like that every week in 24. Uh,
Well,
and
interestingly, you should say that. One of the directors we had worked with, I know from, working with him many times, and he and Kiefer worked a long time on 24. And John came to me one day and said, "Oh, by the way, make sure that anything physical Kiefer has to do, that everything is robust, and if he has to make any contact, you pad it very well, because he won't hold back. He is so true to form in his character that, if he has to hit something, he will. If he has to pull on it, he will." And so I had to be prepared for, a safe reality, no matter what he wanted to do.
that's a little self-destructive on his part.
Yeah.
Oh my God! So you really had to save your lead actor.
Well, all the actors, there's a scene in the house where, one of the co-stars runs into a wall full tilt. And I'm like, talking to John every day, to John's dad, it's like, so what's the plan here? And it's like, well, Rocco, here's what I'm going to do. And here's what you're going to do for me. And so, we we kind of treated it like the compression model bumper of a fancy car, where the edge of the wall was built in such a way that it could deflect. And we had a special foam trim made that looked like wood. It looked solid, but it was forgiving for someone impacting it with their forehead.
Wow. All these things you don't think about, that
Yeah,
a production designer has to be mindful of. Um,
yeah.
uh, so did you get involved with Rabbit Hole, Rocco, as a result of any previous relationship with Kiefer? Because I know you worked together on the movie The Sentinel. Um, I guess
Yeah,
it was almost 20 years ago.
it wasn't so much that. I think I was introduced to the writer directors from another producer I had worked with recently, who thought that I would be a good fit because he knew that I was very much into spy dramas, having worked on many of them. And sure enough, like, just having a brief meeting with John and Glenn, we quickly bonded over our mutual admiration of, like, great spy American dramas, and one movie in particular that we both loved. It's a kind of an underrated spy hit called Sneakers.
Oh,
Um,
oh, sure.
you know, and yeah, it was very obvious that I was very attracted to the material, and it was a world that I liked to play in.
How has film and television production changed since you started working as a designer, I think about 3 decades ago, right?
Mhm.
Has that game changed a lot, in terms of just what you do, what's expected of you, what you're able to do?
Well, obviously, the tools that we work with now, for designing and for, even executing physical built world materials, are so much more advanced. But I think the expectations, as technologies and as means of achieving work change and evolve, expectations grow larger. And we're definitely doing more complex stunts, more elaborate storytelling, filming on a larger scale for television than we would have 30 years ago. But I think in a good way as well, I think with the emergence of diverse storytelling on streaming platforms, the storytelling opportunities, what used to be something you would only do in movies and not in television, those things have merged together. So a story that's fairly complex, like Rabbit Hole, I don't think I would have seen anything like that when I started in this business. But increasingly, complex stories played out over many episodes are something that that the industry wants to make, and I'm very happy for that.
It seems like, I guess what you sort of just alluded to, that you're able to do more sophisticated things in TV that you maybe could have only done in film, say 15, 20 years ago. Now you can do anything on TV that you could have done in film.
Yeah, I think that the techniques have evolved so that television can definitely do the kinds of things, that the grand things that we would only assume that you could do in movies.
We're going to wrap up here in another question or two, Rocco.
Hmm.
But uh, given what we just discussed, how would you compare the experience of working on Rabbit Hole with your production design on, say, La Femme Nikita, the TV series that you did at the end of the last century, which was one of my favorite shows of all time, actually?
Wow, isn't that great? Um, well, I think the difference, um, it's very much what we were just talking about. Um, in those days, something like Nikita, um, there were many more episodes. There was a kind of a longer view, but in a sense, a shorter attention span in terms of writing stories and knowing where the story was going to go. And so when I was working on a show like that, from week to week, I would only really know perhaps where the character might be going in a short bit, like ahead of me, what's the next episode? But I didn't have any long-term awareness of where we were going and what we were doing. On a show like Rabbit Hole, um, I didn't necessarily start with all the episodes, but I had a good sense of what the season was trying to do, who the characters were, and where they were going to end up by a certain point. And so I think that the idea of thinking of it more holistically in terms of a theme and a trajectory is, it's very useful for us. And it adds to the challenge, because you're really aware of, like, okay, I'm doing this for this moment, but I know that this is coming up, and I have to accommodate this emotion and this possibility. So yeah, it thinks bigger in a shorter time span than what we used to do.
And you know where you're headed as opposed to where you are simply in that moment.
Yeah,
We can think 4 or 5 episodes ahead.
yeah. And I think that it's interesting, this show, the one thing was we weren't really sure what note we were ending the season on. And so that was a bit of a dilemma that preoccupied us for quite some time. But I think all it did is it sort of set in motion a thinking about, if we had a chance to do more of this, where would the story be going? And in a way that helped us kind of arrive at a moment to say, this is where the story should stop now. And we know what we might want to talk about if we have a chance to continue with this, which I hope we do.
Yeah, I do as well. That's all the time we have. Um, Thanks so much for your time and wisdom, Rocco, and best of luck on Rabbit Hole and take care.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you today.